Thank you. So, before we sit down, let's have a show of hands. Who here saw anything different than what happened before? Do you notice anyone's eyes moving? Just raise your hand. Oh, good, most of you. Those of you that didn't, I would love to talk to you after the talk. So keep in mind that part of what's really interesting about this is that this is true all of the time. And people frequently don't just move their eyes and move their entire head. You ask them a question, they'll be like, I don't know. You're like, oh my God. It's one of those things that once you notice it, it's constantly there. You'll see me do it. You can practice right now, speaking of which. So here's how you can practice. Oh, sit down.
Oh, sorry. I stole the seat.
I know that sitting down is a moment for conversation. So this is a really fun thing to do when you meet somebody new. You can then start to look for connections and patterns amongst the people that you're talking to. Where you can meet someone and you're like, oh my God, maybe they're primarily visual, I have no idea. And then you can start trying to figure out what's going on. It might also help with the human connection thing, like you pointed out earlier. If you look people in the eye, you begin to notice just what's going on with them. So I recommend that you practice when you meet new people. I recommend after tonight that you start to pay attention to this. But immediately and during this talk, you can practice right now by looking at me and seeing what I do. And then after the talk, come up and tell me what you think my primary method of way I interact with the world is going to be. Is it visual, which is going to be up here? Is it auditory, which is going to be one of these two ways probably? Or is it some kind of internal dialogue, which is going to be down here? Which is different from when I look down at my speaker's notes and then you probably remember what I'm doing. So pay attention and then there'll be no quiz, but just, you know. Oh yeah, good question.
Are there some types of people, does it say something about someone if they don't belong in any particular direction?
Usually not. Like I said, there's no actual universal method to this. This is more like a general way that this goes about. Some people do this just by staring ahead, they defocus their eyes, and they kind of like tilt their head to the side, that kind of thing. That's another way it happens. Yes, question in the back.
If you just like dead eye, you wait for it to do the soul while you're thinking.
Yes, so that's actually the thing that people do. They just stare straight ahead and defocus their eyes.
Not even defocus, it's focusing on you while it's happening.
Well, like I said, there is no wrong way to go about doing this. The whole point of this is start to notice what people do as a way of recognizing that they may have a specific pattern of interaction. This applies to lots of different things, like how to tell if someone's lying to you, how to tell if they're making something up in the moment, how to tell if they don't really know what they're talking about, ways to convey yourself as being someone who knows something versus unsure. It's the classic kind of shifty eye thing that people do where they look left and right. That can be seen as like lack of confidence or lack of certainty about something. But if you stare straight ahead, you really know something, and all it could be is just a different access pattern. And then, like, there's other ways we can go about this. There's other talks I have on things like how to present yourself effectively. But the very first step is just noticing this in yourself and in other people. Yes?
Well, how can you interpret? How can you make any sense of what somebody else is doing if there's no universal pattern?
Yes. So once you know people, then you can begin to start to pay attention to the way they use language, the way that's correlated with something. One of the things I like doing is if you ask somebody if they're left or right-handed, they'll tend to move their head or their body in a specific way that indicates a way of remembering what their body is feeling. Like, for example, I'll just look at all of you right now. Who here has a car? Maybe that's one of you. Oh my God, so many, amazing. Okay, so just take a second and think about what color your car is. Good. All of you just moved your eyes in some particular way. Some of them were up, some of them were to the side. So all you have to do then is once you notice the eye movement, begin to pay attention to how that connects with the kinds of information that you're asking somebody. If you ask someone about what type of code they wrote, what color their car was, what they would look like if they had pink hair, all these sorts of things, then you can begin to notice that kind of access pattern and get a sense of who they are. But again, this all presupposes that you actually notice it enough that you can pay attention to what's happening, which is why this is the first one. Yes?
So you gave an example of what color is your car. Wouldn't that always be visual, or do auditory people?
Oh no, so that's intentionally a visual question. This gets a little bit more abstract on other things like understanding and confusion, which is interesting. Too many questions. Okay, great. Let this boot up a second. Yes, but the intention is by asking a visual question, then to see how that representation system is accessed. So if they say, like, what color is your car? What color is your car? What color is your friend's car? Right? You say,
Red.
great. So, like, you swung your whole head to the side. And I don't know for sure that that's the access pattern, but I could ask you 3 or 4 other follow-up questions and look for patterns. The whole point is that recognize that it's there, then look for pattern development, and then once you see those patterns being developed, it tells you something about this person. Yes?
So let's say that you could actually work out what somebody's access pattern was when they were looking visually or auditorily. How is that useful?
So it can be useful because let's say that you notice that the primary way that someone communicates is through, let's say, visual. So I'll use an example from relationships that tends to come up. You have a partner, you and your partner get along very well, except that she just isn't very emotional when you are. And like, you keep talking about where you see this going, and whatever. Yeah, one of you talks about where it's like, where you see a relationship going, the other one talks about how you should be feeling. So you end up talking past each other because you're using different methods of trying to communicate. And if you can recognize what the other person's method is, then you can use it to interact with them in the way that they get. But again, the first step is always to actually recognize that these are there and then practice. Yes?
Is there a difference between looking left and looking right?
Again, it depends. Generally speaking, left, up, well, if you're looking at me, up here would be visual creation, and up here would be visual recall.
What's that again?
Visual recall. So like when I asked him the color of his car, he swung his head like this way. Yes?
In your last example, how does, with that couple, how does that apply to auditory versus visual versus?
Oh yeah. So like some people might have a bad internal dialogue. Some of you might have a internal dialogue where you remember something bad that happened to you. So this is actually beautiful. This ties exactly into our next space, which is how to rewrite your own memory. So some of you may have had some kind of negative experiences in your life. Who here has had a negative experience? Oh my God, that's so shocking. If you have, you may want to change your emotional reaction to that negative experience. And once you recognize these kind of access patterns, then you can use these in some different ways to change your emotional response to memory. So I'm going to go through these. We're going to go back to these slides in just a second. But generally, if you have visual memory, let's say that there's some particular picture in your mind, some little short movie, you can use these different methods to change that memory. So you can actually rewrite that memory and then re-experiencing it in a way that will change how you actually feel about it. And these are all the kinds of visual tweaks. Literally, this is like, you take the movie, you make it dim, you make it black and white, and then you replay that same memory over again with that change, and the way that you feel about it will be different. And then you keep doing that 3 or 4 times, and you erase the emotional impact that that memory has. So those of you, there's many people who are single, but the person that you're with, they walked out the door, and you have this picture of them walking away from you, it's crushing. And, or maybe it's joyful, let's say it's crushing. And if it's crushing, and like you keep playing that over and over again, you feel just terrible. But if you make it fuzzy, you make it black and white, and you make it so that like it's kind of dim, like someone turned like the lights are on, it's hard to see, that kind of thing, then it actually changes the emotional impact of that memory. But visual is not like the most impactful memory. Wait, hold on just a second, I'll get to it. This is also true for auditory, and many, many people run an internal negative auditory loop. Like they have somebody told you that you were worthless or shitty at some point, and then you're like, I'm going to tell this to myself all the time. This is great. I feel horrible. And usually people aren't happy about it. But you can actually change that. Like maybe you have like some specific memory of like, usually a parent telling you, you are bad, or you are a failure, you fucked up in some way. And then every time you do something wrong, that replays, then you feel bad about yourself. You can change that. You can literally rewrite that memory by changing these sort of different elements to that auditory memory, and then playing it through 2 or 3 times. And then, again, it's about juggling. You just have to keep practicing. And as you practice, the emotional impact of that memory will fade out. I'm going to go through the rest of these and I'll get to your question. The same thing is true for kinesthetic memories. Usually the way this comes up is people have some experience that they feel nauseous about, which is a horrible feeling. Especially people that are anxious, socially anxious people that get in a social situation. They feel horrible. How do you change that? You can actually erase that emotional impact. Great. So, question?
Can you explain how this has an impact on the emotions that you feel in these experiences?
You mean like the neurobiological correlates to these? That's an excellent question that is beyond the scope of this talk. But generally speaking, assume that you're a biological system. I have a background in neuroscience. Anybody else? Yay, neuroscience. Yay, neuroscience. Great. So there's this part of the brain called the sensory strip. It's up here. And you have different parts of your brain that experience emotion. Almost everything in the brain is non-localized, which is to say people have this myth that like language happens here, but that's not true. Really, almost everything in the brain is interconnected. So if you begin to change things and then rewrite what those memories are, you change the whole system and the way you experience it. Does that answer your question? Okay, excellent. So, yes, in the back.
One of the ideas that you talked about that I found really interesting was that people enjoy being in debt. And I'm curious how I can learn more about that. And are there certain variables that the extent of the debt or the amount of time for it to pay it back, are there any variables that would affect how someone feels about being in debt?
So this is a throwback. I'll repeat the question for everybody. It's a throwback to this idea in the first slides around reciprocity and this sense of debt. The best way to characterize this is through helping people. Like if you're ever not sure what to do in a situation and you come into it and you need someone else to do something for you, ask them for help. And this makes them feel like they can do something for you, which people love doing. They're like, oh, I get to help somebody. This is amazing. And strangely, that feeling is directly connected to the feeling of emotional debt. If someone else does something for you, you don't necessarily feel like you owe them. You feel like now you want to give back to the greater community. This is a greater community. All of you have sort of experienced this kind of sensation before. Does that answer your question at all?
What you hit on is that there's a more fundamental need that's being fulfilled, that people have something to offer. And that's really what I was interested to learn more about.
Like how to give people that feeling that they have something to offer?
About what is really driving whatever kind of comes off in this.
I don't know, we could talk about things like coevolution within groups and how it's beneficial for people to work together. But I mean, this is like well beyond the scope of this. This is much more applied, which is, this works, you should use it. Not why it works, which I can talk about afterwards if people get excited. This thing is pretty not. Okay, so part of this, once this turns back on again, is to recognize how your own perception of reality is actually completely wrong. And one of the best ways to do this is, I'm going to show you a picture of a man with a child. It is a grandfather and a grandson. Can all of you see that? Yes? Excellent. You all see it? Wonderful. Great. So shout out some words that describe the man. Old and bald. I was thinking more like, not necessarily exact yes, but like what sort of person do you think he is? Wait, what? Wait, say that again.
Like well-kept, hygienic.
Hygienic, well-kept. Okay, good. Excellent. So. Okay, good. So let's try this again. So here we have a pedophile with his victim. Look at the man. Great. Now describe this man.
Sinister.
Sinister. Oh man.
Fun-loving. Nasty.
Nasty. Pretty good. Of course, the interesting part here is that those were the same photo over and over again. The same picture. It's about what you actually perceive as the situation. So it's much less about what's really there, and much more about like what you think, like the value that you attribute to something, which is a problem because then your actual perception of reality is off. And usually people describe the evil pedophile as evil and cruel, and the grandfather is like loving and gentle and kind and bald. So what you can do is recognize how this runs your life right now. One of the big pieces that change this is when people fixate on some small piece of information, like he is a pedophile, which is salient, but also changes your perception of what the whole picture is. And throughout your daily life, the same type of fixation happens, where you get the thing that has the most emotional impact. Like one of the things that happens during robberies or crimes if someone has a gun, is that they don't notice the person holding the gun. Everyone remembers the gun in amazing detail, and no idea about this. There's this very famous fake study of a supposed bank robbery where there's two versions to it. In one of them, there's like 5 people being robbed, and they steal the money and they leave. And they ask people like, what do the bank robbers look like? And they describe them. In the other version, there's the same exact people, except there's like this kid there also, and the kid gets shot in the head and dies. And in the second version, nobody remembers anything, because they're all fixated on this single emotionally impactful moment. Because even though all the information is there, they just wiped it out. And if you do this in groups, people will completely forget this together. So all of you together would forget all those specific details. So before we go on to the next thing, is there any questions about this? Like how to rewrite memory? Yes, on perception bias.
So I decided to take my top 10 negative memories and rewrite them. Maybe like 5 positive ones and amplify them.
Sure, yes.
Can I just like Google how to do that, or just after?
I can give you the slides, it'll be fine.
Okay.
I can also teach you how to do this in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it's all practice.
Okay.
But yes, I'm happy to show you. I'm happy to show all of you if you like, but that's a different, slightly beyond. Just so you know it's there, the slides will be available, you can go have them and enjoy. Any other questions about this? Perception bias? Yes.
So I've never heard of this audio-visual rewriting being used in any kind of therapy that I've ever read about.
Cognitive behavior therapy uses it.
Really?
There's usually don't do it quite so explicitly. Yeah. Any other question? Yes, question.
So from my understanding, memories are actually proteins in the brain. So I just listened to this podcast where essentially it's your true memory is what you haven't remembered recently. So every time you remember something like that, that's actually the last memory that changes. So like how does that connect to like, you know, as you were saying before, like rewriting memories so it's less emotional?
Well, yeah, so there's, I'm going to answer your question in kind of a roundabout way. If I don't answer it, I'll confirm. She was asking like, well, she's sort of podcast where the only thing you really remember is your most recent memory, and then you basically keep re-remembering and rewriting that. Is that, okay, good. And so the question is like, how does that relate to the rewriting of memory thing? That relates beautifully, actually. I did not know this, but this is fantastic. Which is that, I know this from brain damage, where there's different people, like everyone knows like the classic form of amnesia, is you forget everything before. There's another version where you forget everything after the point of injury, which is, I think, by far worse. And what people do is that every morning they wake up and they have to retell themselves who they are, because they forgot. And what most people do with negative memories, like your top 5 or 10, is that they retell themselves this negative memory. And then over time, that negative memory amplifies or changes or morphs into this core being of who you are, where it like infects all the different aspects of your life. And this relates to the rewriting of memory component, because what happens is that you just intentionally choose to re-remember it in a slightly different way. Rather than amplifying that feeling of the person walking out the door and leaving you hollow, you change it so that they kind of fade out into nothingness. And then your emotional impact of that breakup becomes almost nothing. Or nothing. Oh yes, question.
What are the general principles for amplifying memory to better? Because you said one was like quiet and loud. So is loud making it better, or making it quieter makes it less impactful? And what are the general principles?
The general principles is you run off of, I'll go back up. So we'll use the visual example. If you have a mediocre memory, you went to the beach with somebody you care about and it was okay, you could intentionally go through and begin to insert more aspects to that memory to make it better, make it brighter, make the ocean smell better, make it so the sand underneath your feet feels better, make it so that like when you hug them, you felt the warmth of their heart, and then just literally lie to yourself about the details. Because you already do this, except that you do it the other way, usually. Yeah, so it's about modulating the different parts of it that actually change how you feel. So sometimes making a memory bright will make it less impactful. Sometimes making it dim will make it less impactful. Again, unfortunately, this is sort of very unique to the person. Sorry, hold on, I'll get to you in a second. In the back.
So there are ways that we alter memories that are subconscious, and because it goes super easy to assimilate.
Yep.
Ones that we do that are conscious, it seems like there's almost like immune response. It almost seems like there's like you're inserting heart back to your brain and your body rejects it. What is it that you do to kind of let those memories settle over time?
You practice. You just do it over and over again. Because you already are doing this, like you do this already. Let's say you have a really bad breakup, and then every time you meet someone new, you think, this person can never love me because I'm unlovable. Like, that's the same type of fake situation, except you're doing it in a way which is